Okay, guys, welcome to section 2.1 in chapter 2, and we're going to kind of dip into a lot of stuff, some really important things in this chapter, so I figured we'd get a head start here before the test to dive into it. So we're going to start with something pretty simple: relative frequency, cumulative frequencies, and percentiles, and talk about those today in this section. So recall back to chapter 1 when we're describing distributions, and we pretty much concentrated on the main features. We didn't really worry about dips in the graph too much. We just focused on those main peaks, whether there were one of them or two of them, things like that. And we would describe them. We would look for symmetry, whether they were roughly symmetric or skewed right, skewed left. Okay. With these new graphs that we're going to look at, these offer a different view of a distribution because they allow us to describe the relative position of an individual within an entire distribution. More specifically, we call that a percentile at which that value falls. Right, so a percentile, we would say the pth percentile of a distribution is the value that p% of the observations fall below it. So a test score at the 80th percentile does not necessarily mean like an 80% score. It means 80% of the test takers scored lower than your score. So we get that a lot where a lot of people see these really low percentiles. You know, I'm at the 50th percentile, and they think that's a really horrible thing because we associate that with like getting a 50% on a test, but that's not necessarily the case. If you're at the 50th percentile, you did better than 50% of the people there. Also notice something while I'm talking too, that I'm not saying like you're in that particular percentile. A lot of people do that also. They say like, oh, I was in the 50th percentile, right? You can't actually be in a specific percentile. You actually need to use language that talks more about where you're at instead. So when you're using language with percentiles, you are always at the percentile versus in the percentile, right? Percentiles are boundaries, right? So you can't necessarily be in them, you are at them. All right, so let's look at, for example, Mr. No's geometry class. And so here's the scores of the first test, okay, that we have. And we chose 86 to sort of be the key point there, and we'll talk about 86 there in a second. Well, we've bolded it for a future question here. So we look at this distribution, and we want to just describe it, which means we're going to use SOCS to do it. For the most part, we'd say, hey, you know, this is pretty symmetric. So we would say the shape is roughly symmetric. It's got a single peak. All right, no bimodal situation going on here. It seems to have no outliers, at least that we can tell. And there's 5 groups in this, so it's not like there's any specific value that's kind of being hidden in the distribution. Since there are, what do we have here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different groups. It's pretty spread out, so yeah, no outliers. Let's talk about the center. If we start crossing these out, we'll slowly get there to the center. Let's see here. It looks like it's going to fall right in that middle, right where I am right now. Yep, it's going to fall right at 80. So the center is 80 points. And the spread is from 67 points to, where are we at, 93 points. So yeah, there we go. All right, so about, I think it's a range of, what, 26? Yeah. All right, so the bold score, right? Let's imagine that's Stewie Griffin's score on the test, right? How did he perform relative to his classmates? Well, if we look at Stewie's score here, let me erase a little bit of this right here. So, okay, 86. Stewie is actually the 4th term. It's this one right here, the bold one. He's the 4th term from the top, right? So that actually means that if there were, well, let's see, 25 people in this, that there are actually 21 people below him. So all these people below him right here. So we would say, okay, so since Stewie is the fourth score from the top. So since he's the fourth score from the top, 21 people scored below him. Okay, so in other words, 21 divided by 25 is 84%, right? That means Stewie is at the 84th percentile. All right, so essentially we say, hey, you know what, 21 people scored worse than him, 29 out of 25 is 84, so he would fall at that 84th percentile. And a lot of people want to take 22 divided by 25, but that's not necessarily where Stewie's at. He didn't beat 22 people, right? So a percentile refers to the number of people that you sort of scored better than, and he scored better than 21 out of the 25. So don't count 22 because that's not, he didn't beat himself, right? Essentially. So yeah, so cool. All right, let's look at maybe one more problem here. All right, so this is Major League Baseball wins, and the stem pot below shows the number of wins for each of the 30 Major League Baseball teams in 2009. And again, we've highlighted a couple different scores here. We want to talk about them. So let's calculate and interpret the percentiles for the following baseball teams. All right, so first we want to look at the Colorado Rockies, who had 92 wins, and so they're the yellow score right here, 92 wins. And so the first thing I think we need to figure out is sort of where they fall. You can count from the top or you can count from the bottom. If we count from the top, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They are the sixth score. And according to this, there were 30 different teams here. So in other words, if we look, okay, at them, and we want to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, right? That makes sense. I'm just double checking for us. 24 below him, they're the sixth score from the top. So that means that 24 out of 30, which is 80%. So in other words, the Colorado Rockies are at, right, the 80th percentile because I'm just going to put this on the very first one. I think we'll leave the other ones. 24 teams, and let's put 24 out of 30 teams. 24 out of 30 teams did worse than them. So we have sort of some explanation as to why they fell at that 80th percentile. I think if you just want to say, the Colorado Rockies are at the 80th percentile and include this work, I think both of those things together are important to answer a question about percentiles. Let's talk about the New York Yankees. Nice. Okay, so the New York Yankees, they are the top team in the league. And a lot of times the top team, people want to say, well, they're at the 100th percentile, right? I mean, yeah, you're at the 100th percentile. You are the top person. But if you think about what being at the 100th percentile means, it actually isn't possible, right? Being at the 100th percentile means that you scored or did better than 100% of the people, which means that you actually did better than yourself, which you're like, that's just not possible. You're part of the data set. You can't beat yourself and still, be there. So being at the 100th percentile is kind of a tricky thing and really, honestly, not possible. And so actually, when we look at this, we say, well, okay, well, that means that, 29 out of 30 teams, they beat 29 out of 30 teams. They didn't beat themselves, which is actually 97%. And technically, it's 96.7, just round that up to 97. And so we say the New York Yankees are at the 97th percentile. And again, we could say, because, the same thing we said before, or just kind of show our work over here like we did. And then finally, the Cleveland Indians, right? What happens if we have sort of two of the same scores in a row, right? Well, if we have two scores in a row, that means that essentially those people are at the same percentile, right? So whatever two teams they are, the Cleveland Indians and the other one, both beat 3 out of the 30 teams that are there. So one of them did not beat 4 teams. You might say, well, the second 5 beat 4 teams and the first 5 beat 3 teams. Nope, they're on the same playing field or the same level here. So they both beat 3 teams. 3 out of 30 is 10%. And so both of those teams fell at the 10th percentile. So the Cleveland Indians are at the 10th percentile. Okay, cool. So a little review real quick. 1, you're always at a percentile. 2, you can never be at the 100th percentile because that means you beat yourself. And 3, if you have a tie, like if you have 2 percentiles, they're at the same percentile, and you go from there. Some people might ask, like, well, what happens then if you go to 70? Do you count both of those percentiles as sort of two separate? Yeah, of course, right? At the 70th percentile, at that point, they've got how many teams ahead of them? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So like I'm sorry, I'm misspeaking here. If you scored a 70, you would have 5 teams below you, 5 out of 30, right, being 1/6, so 16th percentile, 17th percentile. So yeah, if you score a 70, count both of those 5s as teams you beat. You did beat them after all. So don't always think you have to lump those 5s together, but if you do want to find the percentile for those 5s, then you need to treat them as the same spot. Okay, and then of course you would do the same with the 70s and the 75 here wins and all the 87s and 95s, right? All the repeats they would all be at the same percentile, okay? All right, so I think that's where we're going to stop for today, and that way we have a good idea of coming into percentiles, and then we'll talk about these OJABs when we come back on Wednesday and how they can incorporate percentiles. And also, if you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, no reading quiz on this section, and I'll see you all Wednesday for the rest of it. Thank you.